Good evening. I'm Scott Binsack, and thank you for joining me. Happy Mother's Day. Tonight, I'm going to be discussing a mother's love, crossing boundaries. And as always, with my show, I'm going to give you a little repeat of some of my history for those who have watched my previous shows, so that newcomers can understand the background, especially tonight. Tonight, I'm going to share with you a lot of things I've never shared with anyone, as well as a major lesson in all this about unconditional love and how to deal with a parent, especially a mom, who you may not be in agreement with or close to, or may have an estranged relationship with. I'm going to tell you my story about a very special lady, my mom. My mother passed away in 1999 at the age of 52 from a massive heart attack. My mom grew up in Westbury, our hometown on Long Island, and married my father. And they both were from different sides of the track, so to speak. My father from the lived in the big house, the oldest of 7 children, the wealthy family, and my mother was the humble family who moved from Flushing in New York, where my grandfather was a police officer. They had humble upbringings, and it's from this side of the family that I got my main morals and values and standards. My mom was a very special woman, and I know everybody says that about their moms, but I didn't have a very good relationship for many, many years with my mother. I quit school in 8th grade, and I left home at basically 16. My parents got divorced when I was 4, and my dad was a cop in Nassau County. And my mother, who was brought up Lutheran, my father was Catholic. So we had, there was 2 different, like I said, there's 2 different upbringings here. And my mom was brought into a world that she was kept secluded from. Her growing up was, reading in her bedroom, and she was an artist and drawing and teaching Sunday school after church. And she got brought into a world that was totally different than what she knew. She got swept off her feet by my father, who was, went to the all private Catholic school, drove a, new Mustang, and, he was the all-American guy to her. The family was, the great Catholic family and this and that. But behind all that, it wasn't. So here's my mom, this humble girl being brought into a world that was different for her. It was new for her. And what I'm telling you is come from my mother's mouth. This is, not my assumptions. And tonight I'm going to share also a secret, if you want to call it that. It was a secret, a shocking one, that maybe 3 or 4 people know on this planet, and I think 2 are dead. And it involves me and my mother, as well as somebody in my father's family. And I'm going to share the first part tonight and the rest at another time, and possibly on my video book site or on this show. I haven't decided yet. So we have this humble woman, young girl, and she marries my father. They have a great big wedding, and they had it at the Westbury Manor, and which is a very large place here on Long Island to have weddings, and it was all done up, and my mom got a wide awakening, so to speak, because she lived such a sheltered childhood, and my grandparents are good people. Uh, they're both deceased now, but they're very, very good people. However, my grandmother grew up with severe alcoholism, to where she had to witness her father hang her mother out of a 8-story window on Bound Street in Flushing in his drunk stupors when he came home from work during the Great Depression. It's a very tough time. And that alcoholism, I believe, trickled down to my mother and my mother's brother. There was only 2 of them. My uncle as well, my Uncle Robert on my mother's side. He's deceased also. Never got along with my Uncle Robert. It's a whole nother story. But here she is in she has a beautiful house in Westbury, and she has it all. She got her own flower shop. She was a florist. Like I said, she was an artist, so doing flowers and weddings and things for her. She opened the Westbury Florist. It's still there today on Post Avenue. And it was my father's father who financed it for them. Anything that they wanted, they basically got. As my father was the oldest of 7 and spoiled rotten. And I'm not one, I don't like spoiled rotten. Not my style. I don't believe in spoiling children. So here she is. She has this great life and all these things, and well-known community. She's known throughout the community, and rightfully so. My mother had a lot of friends. She was a very open, beautiful woman, blonde, very, very attractive lady. Very good. She had more friends than I could ever imagine. Real friends, too. Real friends. So as things get bad in my parents' marriage, my mother couldn't get pregnant. And she kept praying and praying to get pregnant. And finally she got pregnant. I was born in 1969 on Halloween. And it was like, for my mother, it was a dream come true. My parents' marriage continued to disintegrate. My father being a cop, he was out all the time doing his thing. My mother was doing her thing. They used to party. Back then, there was parties all the time. Everybody be over for cocktails and doing their thing. And they had the bar in the basement and big parties at my father's family's house. There was parties for everything. It was the thing to do then. And my mom spoiled me as a baby, and I'll leave it as a baby. I was like everything that she ever wanted. And as time went on, my mother continued to drink, as well as my parents' marriage fell apart. And they moved from Westbury when I was 4 and bought a house. And when I say move, they got separated. And in New York, you have to be separated to get divorced for a certain period of time. So they separated, but then my father wanted to see if he could make it work. So he bought another home out east in Suffolk County on Long Island. And they tried to make it work there. And I can remember as a child, I still have these memories of the fighting and the abuses. My father was an abusive man. He would hit my mother. I'm very big against hitting a woman, and I believe it's because of what I saw as a child. I do not. It's something that I cannot stand. I believe any man, and I'll say it about my father, any man that hits a woman is, I won't use the word on this show, but let's just say not a man. And they broke up. That was it. The divorce ensued. My mother left. The custody battle began. And I was with my father. My father had the best attorneys. My mother could only afford so much. My mother then began to lose herself. And I was with my dad. I was with my mom. I was with my dad. And this went on for, many years back and forth. My father ultimately won custody of me. And as I said on other shows, it's like the War of the Roses. And it was bad. I had to testify in court. I'll never forget it. I think I was 7 or 8 years old. I had to testify in court. Go through, see all these child psychologists. Who do you want to live with? Blah, 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 blah. And I would see my mom on the weekends if she showed up. My mother took a turn for what I would say the worst. And I don't mean that to be sounding the way that it is. I mean it because people do things at certain points in their life for certain reasons at those points. My mother began to drink even more. There were many men in her life. My mother began to look for love in all the wrong places, and I believe her true love was with my father, even till the day she died. And as my father, still alive, believed the love was still there. And they both, for over the years, constantly, always, that's all they talked about was each other, and not in a bad way. After X amount of years, just living with regrets. Other stuff I've discussed in other shows. So during this time period, the times I did get to spend with my mom were constant. My mother was with some boyfriend, or my mother was with some other boyfriend, or my mother was drinking, and my mother would get nasty. And my mother was always talking bad about my father, and my father was always talking bad about my mother. It was this constant back and forth. But during those times, and I can remember my mom leaving me there at my dad's, not coming to pick me up when she was supposed to because she was with somebody else, another man. I didn't have time for her son. And every time I saw my mom, she was always telling me how much she loved me and she missed me. And um, my mom taught me from since I was a child and during this time until I was older, about God. My mom used to repeat the same thing over and over to me. God helps those who helps themselves. God helps those who helps themselves. And I remember that constantly, in my head through all my years as growing up. God helps those who helps themselves. And I went through torture as a child with this back and forth with my parents. It was a horrible thing. And my father was an abusive father to me. Would hit me, would do, up until a point before I finally left home when I was older. And my father went to hit me one night, and I decided to come at him with a bat. He never hit me again. But during all those years, it was a constant back, and I always loved my mother. My mother would always, I wanted my mother's love. I missed my mom. The years with my dad were not, because my father got married to someone else, and the evil stepmother, so to speak. And yeah, she was pretty evil. We'll use those words. And another abusive woman. It's amazing how people attract what they are. And I've discussed this in other shows. And here's the point part of the point I'm trying to make is that through all these years, a child follows what their parents and what their parents are examples. And especially A mother. A mother is like that special person to you as a kid and even as you get older and for the rest of your life. Your mom is your mom. It's the only mother you have. And here I am constantly wanting my mother's love. And my mom was always trying to farm me off back to my father, or all I wanted was my mother's attention. And when I left home, years later at 15, 16 roughly, my mother wasn't even there then when I needed her. I'm going to tell you part of this story here. I was 14. I was living with my dad in Florida, and I'll never forget it. We were in Winter Haven, Florida, by Lakeland. My dad was living there in a condo, and that was it. My stepmother wanted me out. I was such a bad kid. Not that I did anything I can remember at the time. So he put me on a plane back to New York. No questions, ifs, ands, or buts. I was 14. They put me on a plane, walked me to a plane, put me on that plane, and I had called my mom before I left at the house. My father made me call my mother and say I was coming home. She had to pick me up at the airport. Okay, my mom, I get her on the phone, tell her, she's like, I can't take you. I don't know what you're going to do. I'll never forget it. Never, ever forget this story. I don't know what you're going to do. So here I go. I fly in, and I fly into Long Island, LaGuardia. And there I am. I get off the plane. It was later in the evening, at night. I went to a payphone. There's no such thing as cell phones then. Here I am in a payphone, and this is January. I'm on a payphone. I'm cold. I'm from Florida. I don't even have a jacket. And I call my mother on the phone. And I said, Mom, I'm here. Can you please come get me? I'm at the airport. She said, Scotty, I can't come get you. I'm sorry. I don't know what you're going to do, but I can't come get you. And she hung up the phone on me. And she was drunk that night. And I'm like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. Started crying. It didn't matter. She was gone. She was off the phone. I tried to call her back. She never answered the telephone. So I ended up having to call one of my uncles, my father's brother, my father's younger brother, to come get me and take me to the family house in Westbury. It was like I was a commodity, you know what I mean? Like, go here, go there. It was like, it doesn't matter. Stick them somewhere. Years later, when my relationship got better with my mom, I told her that story. And she was just like, she didn't even remember. So she says. So as time went on, as I've discussed in my other shows, and from that moment on, when I came back from the airplane, my mother never picked me up. Things were never the same with my mother until many years later. With me, in my soul, my heart. And I always loved my mom. Love my mom today. And the story, it gets better. So here, I end up with my uncle. And that's from school there, I left home. That was it. Went out on my own. Ended up living back with that was about a year later. I ended up living back with my grandparents in Westbury, my mom's parents. And my mother was actually upset that my grandparents were going to let me live there, upstairs of their house, which I was made it into just like a basic apartment for myself. And as I said, my grandparents were good people, but they lived in denial about their daughter, especially with the alcohol. My mother could do no wrong. She's the only daughter. My mom could do no wrong. So here I am. I discussed in my other shows, I went to work, I opened my own business and became successful and got out of my grandparents. During that whole time, I would only see my mother on holidays. She would show up there for Easter or Mother's Day. Um, on my birthday, she'd pop up, give me a card, a gift. She's always running late, my mom. My mom was never like me. I run late. But my mom was always, had to come in. She was always dressed very well and always had her agenda. And she was, all I wanted was my mom's love. And I remember those times and those dinners when, at that period of time, when she would come and my mom actually, as she would grab me and hold me, she said, I'm very proud of you as I started to establish my career. And she said, I'm very proud of you, blah, blah, blah. And, I kept thinking to myself, and I had many arguments with my mother at that time about, you were never there for me. You left me. You were never there for me. And she, my mom lived most of her life until many years later, which I'll get into, in denial for any of her actions. Constant denial. She had a great life outside of me. She had no time for her son. No time for her son. And I always wanted to please my parents, as we all do growing up. You want to please your parents. And I learned something even back then, young, that helped me the rest of my life. You can't please someone else. You have to please yourself. In other words, love yourself. But you always want your parents' love and your approval. You always want their approval. Always. I learned how not to seek that approval. And it went on with my father's family and even my mother's family at times, my grandparents. You wanted their approval. There was a point when I was younger, by the time I was 18, where I finally said, you know what? And I had to work on it all the time and deal with it. I don't want anybody's approval. I want my own approval. I want to be okay for me. So I had a thing that I did no matter what, even if I was estranged from my mother, and if I did get the chance to see her on my birthday, I would give my mother a gift. I would give her some piece of jewelry. Even when I was younger, I saved the money from working. I was always working as a kid. And then by the time I was 18, I had my own construction company. I always bought my mother a piece of jewelry on my birthday, and I would give it to her. And I would remember her always being so grateful for that. But then, after I gave it to her, she went on her merry way. And she'd call me all the time, leave me messages, and she would be drunk and leave me long messages and crying and telling me how much she loves me. And then she'd go back into the past. My mom lived in the past. I watched my mother live in the past in denial, but it was always about the past. It was like she was stuck there. Back to my father, back to my father's family, back to things. It was never about my mom. It was never what she did wrong or the issues she had or about her alcoholism. And I kept telling her that she was alcoholic. And it wasn't just alcoholism. There was much more there, and yet on one persona, she would show the world how she had so many friends because she showed this face, this incredible face of this wonderful woman that she was. There was another side of her that was incredible. Most giving person you ever want to put to others, not to me. Always looking for love in the wrong places. Multiple boyfriends. And I'm not telling you this story to put down my mother, because I'm not. I'm talking real reality here. That's what my show is about. Being real. This is real. And I know people watching this have mothers that have done similar or worse or whatever. And that's not what it's about. This is not about that. And I want everybody to know that. Because there's a good ending to this. And It was difficult. It was extremely, extremely difficult. And now during this time, I was telling my mother, I started to tell my mother here and there about the abuses I went through as a child with my father's family. And I was telling her since I was 2 years old, 2 or 3 years old, when I could first start to talk, honest to God, about childs. You need to listen to children at 2 and 3 and 4 if they tell you that somebody in their family is touching them, abusing them, etc. I'm being very real here. Children don't lie at that age. They don't make things up and just out of the blue. She never paid it any mind. My father did to an extent, but my mother, never. It was, again, living in denial. That can't be. That couldn't be. And God, oh, I had to defend myself. And for years, it took me 40 years to learn that I never have to defend myself to anybody. And it stems from this childhood and defending things to my mother, because my mother lived in such denial. But yet then there were these incredible moments with my mom that I'll never forget, of the good ones, of the incredible hugs, or we'd go to the beach, or dinners at her, she'd make me dinner and I'd stop over at her house and she'd make me dinner. And it was those special little moments. And we'd have great talks, especially when she was sober. And then I became really successful. And here's where it even gets tougher. I became very successful and I had money. My mom kept telling me how proud she was of me, but at the same time, she kept asking me for money. And my mom was known to do this with my grandparents. And as my grandparents got to see me progress in life, because I lived there till I was 18 when I moved out, but I still always maintained a very close relationship with my grandparents. My grandfather was like my dad. Very good man. My grandparents would be giving my mother money. My mother needed money for something always, constantly. So when I was younger and I first started making money, it was like, you can't tell your mom no, But as I matured and I learned, and I kept seeing my mother coming back for just money, and she'd only show her face to me when she needed money. Or if I got a new car, she's like, well, can you buy me a new car? Why do you have that car? Can't you buy me a new car? And I'm being very honest with you. There was severe jealousy with my mother. My mother was very jealous of me. And yes, proud, but the alcoholism, the other part, made her, and that alcoholic personality. And I've come to know a lot about alcoholism, because not just because of my mom being an alcoholic, but because of several in my father's side of the family being alcoholics, especially my father's mother, my grandmother. So it was constant. Even my mother, when my children were born, you know how you call a grandmother, can you babysit for my kids? And da, da, da. I had to pay my mom to babysit my children. I kid you not, I had to pay my mother, and it was a good sum of money to babysit my children. I'd have arguments with her, and I'm like, why do I have to pay you to babysit your grandchildren? You should want to be able to babysit your grandchildren. It was always an inconvenience for my mom. And she kept drinking this whole time. And it was to the point where I couldn't even go to dinner with my mom. And I liked those I loved those moments that my mom and I did have, with these incredible conversations, or those special mom moments. My mom taught me how to pray when I was a little boy, growing up. The prayer, now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. I'll never forget that. I taught it to my own children, because my ex-wife wasn't very big on God, and she didn't know much about religion. And I'm not a big, I said, my show, I've died. I've seen it. So this is not about religion, this show, but my point was that my mom had so many special moments and great things about her. that it was sad that I had to, over the years, to watch my mom stay stuck in the same place. And she was stuck. And then I finally cut my mom off. I had to. I had no choice but to cut my mother out of my life, because the negativity from my mother was bringing negativity to me, to my soul. It was harming me. It was one of the hardest things I ever had to do. And what I mean by that is I had to step away from my mom. And she would call and I would talk to her, make sure she was okay. And when I say stepped away, I always made sure she was okay from the outside, because she didn't live too far from me. And I'd see her now and then, or I'd see her at my grandparents for a get together. And finally, I get a phone call. And the message was on my machine. My mom used to leave me these long, drawn out messages, and that's how I knew she was drunk. And again, it was reverting to the past and this and that, and she was sorry, and then she'd put blame on me. And my mom, and I'm going to get into this quick here, my mom at one point said it was my fault as a child that I got abused, that I should have known better not to when I was 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. Serious stuff here. And I tell you this story with full love for my mom and full forgiveness for my mother for everything, because I don't harbor any anything against her from any of this. And you have to do that in your life to move forward. You have to forgive others. And my mom is my mom. She'll always be my mother. So I get this call, and there was a message there, and I check my messages, and it's her telling me that she's admitted that she's an alcoholic and that she's going to get help. I was like, okay. I called her back and I talked to her. We used to have these long conversations. And sure enough, she went into AA. And as time went on, she stayed sober. She became a major sponsor of others. She became a major speaker to help others with alcoholism. And as those years went on, I got to know my mom, my real mom. And we became best friends. Best friends. And no, there was still certain things that my mom lived in denial about, and it takes a long time. And the alcoholic personality, even somebody who's not drinking, remains. It takes a lot to get rid of that. But I got to know my real mom, as I said. And we had some incredible times together. Incredible times. Now, it was during this time, and I'm in my 20s at this point, that I happened to get I was at my mother's house, and I was doing some work for her. My guys were there, and we were doing some work. She needed central air conditioning put in and whatever, and I had my guys there. I was taking care of the work and putting some skylights in her house and doing some other stuff. I happened to be in the garage. I had to go in the garage, and I saw this old filing cabinet my mother always had, one of them old steel ones. And I'm like, I always wondered what was in here. So here I am, open the filing cabinet up. And I looked, the first one was just junk. And then I go down to the second one. I couldn't get the third drawer open. And I open the drawer, and I see files, and it has to do with, Scott's birth, this, that, letters, and this. And I find some letters. And I started reading, and then I started reading more. and more. And I'm like, as I told you in the beginning of this, that my mother couldn't get pregnant. It was like 4 or 5 years into my parents' marriage. I think it was 5 years into my parents' marriage, and she still couldn't get pregnant. And then all of a sudden she got pregnant. So I'm looking and I'm reading, and I think I may have probably turned sheet white. Couldn't see myself. It was hot that day. I'll never forget. It was July. I was putting in this, and I'll never forget it. And I'm reading, and it had to do with this file had to do with some other things that had to be where I had reported some abuse, and the authorities had found it correct about another family member from my father's side of the family. And the authorities, the person was arrested. And back then, abuse was not what it is today. You know, they Megan's List, they didn't treat these, abusers the way they do today, child abusers. If it was up to me, and I'll say it on this show, I think pedophilia, regardless of it being a mental illness or sickness, and sexual abuse are two different things, just so people know. And I know this because I've studied a lot of it and talked to many doctors about it on my own, meaning friends and associates, people I know. And I'm reading this, and I'm like in shock. And my mother wasn't home. So I take this file, and I actually took it home to my office, photocopied it, and put the file back. And there had been rumors that I had been told from other family members at my father's side of the family. And and now here I am again in my 20s after I just started building a decent relationship with my mother, and I get this shocking news. And I'm like, me, the person I am, I'm going to go ask her directly. So I go, and she comes home that day. My guys were done. I sent them home. I'll never forget it. It's in her house. And sitting at the kitchen table. And I asked her questions first. And my first question to her was, is my father really my father? And she turned from me from the sink where she was, I don't know, washing her hands, dishes, whatever, and said, what do you mean? I said, is my father my father? And she said, of course he is. I said, okay. I said, we've been through a lot. And I said, no matter what, I love you, but I want the truth. And as I told you, now I'm going to get into, as I said, she was always in denial still to that day that I was ever abused, and that if I was abused, it was my own fault. Still, at this point in time, in my 20s. And my childhood was, and I slowly get into it in different parts of the show, and it's not that I have anything to hide about it, it's just there's certain things I discuss and certain things I don't discuss, and certain things I'll be discussing when I tell my life story. Anybody who has a traumatic event from their childhood is, it affects them the rest of their life. I didn't have one, I had 12 years of it. And I've learned to deal with it, turn it all into, and including with my mom. My mother was a major part of this, as I've been discussing. So I said to her, I said, Mom, please just tell me the truth. And then took the file. I had it sitting on the chair there, and I pulled the file out of the table that I copied. I put in another file for him. Opened it up. I said, "What's this then?" So she tells me, and she actually finally, after, and this is how alcoholism is, the denial and that personality. After an hour or so of denying it, even with the black and white right there, she finally admitted it to me that she had an affair with my father's brother, who was also thereafter named my godfather at my christening. And I know people watching this could be like, "Oh, that's like, No, people do a lot of things for many reasons in their lives. And I'm not to judge my mother. It's not my place. My place at the time, and after, even, I don't have to do it now, but is to come to understand why and to make sense of it all so that I can forgive and move forward. Because there's another powerful part of this story that I'm only telling you the first half tonight. So my father, that I've known for all those years, turns out that he's not my father. My uncle was my father. And it's kind of strange how it comes back that I get married at a young age, thinking that, as I was lied to by a girl that I met, my ex-wife, telling me that I got her pregnant after only knowing her a couple weeks, and I never got anybody pregnant, that she was pregnant with my kid. And as I discussed in other shows, years later, I found out that that wasn't my son. And now here I am I was at my 20s, finding out that my father really wasn't his father. As my oldest, my son Scott, I still say my son, but he's not my blood son, found out, and not from me, from my ex, that my father, of all the years that I knew him, is not my father, but yet his brother. And as I said, there's more to this. My mom and I then went on another estranged. Now I'm in my 20s. I'm working like crazy. I'm very successful. I have my own family I have to take care of and dealing with my own matters with my own marriage because of that situation, many other lies that I was told. You see, we all attract who we are at those times in our lives. We all create our own paths, our own destinies. Don't let anybody ever kid you differently. We are all in charge of our decisions, just like my mother was in charge of her decision to sleep with my father's brother. Not on one occasion, on several. And here was the girl who was the Lutheran. And I'm not saying this big saying to put my mother down for this, because I'm not. Not at all. And as I said, my mom is a wonderful lady. However, we all make mistakes. We all make decisions at times that, for many reasons, some unknown until later dates in life. And I'm guilty of all of the above. So even though I found that out, this part. I mean, there's a shocking, very bad part to the end of it, of that piece. I moved on. I mean, my life. I continued with my life. I learned how to take even more pain, that pain, on top of, and turn it into productivity. And facing my mom with the problem, we moved on from there as well. And I never threw it in her face. I never, none of it, even denial of her denial about many things, because she was my mom. But did I separate myself from my mother? Yes, because if I didn't, it would have been lethal to my life. Because no matter what I did, I would have never gotten that acceptance. My mother's, she was always proud, and I guess you can call that approval, but I never had that constant love from my mother. Yet we became best friends. You'd say that. I could say that. We became best friends. And as the years went on, my mom became very ill, very sick. You never know looking from the outside, but she became very sick. And at one point in the beginning, when she kept telling me this, I didn't believe her. I'm going to be very honest with you, because my mother was known to say things to get money or to make me feel bad for her. Part of the alcoholism, and it sticks in your head. And my mother ended up with some very bad conditions, and stemmed from lupus and a rare degeneration of the degenerate bone disease, as well as ventricular tachycardia to SARD of the heart. It's another rare electrical short. And at that time, they couldn't do a pacemaker because my mother had very serious problems with blood pressure and all kinds of stuff going on. She used to take pills, like more pills, and make it even worse for herself. And I still always took care of my mom to the point, not to the point where she could abuse it, because everything was about materialistic things with my mom. And this is all shocking, because my mom had such good parents, and they were really good people. My grandparents were really good people. Of course, everybody has their issues, and I'm not saying that they don't. My grandmother had her issues because she grew up with alcoholism in her personality. And my grandfather, he had his but he was a wonderful man, good people. My mother's a good person. She helped many, many people. That's one thing. My mother touched many souls in a good way. But somehow I was the back burner for most of it. We are all responsible for our decisions, as my mother was as well. And I, from my grandparents, and this was a thing that my grandparents and I had for all the years, my grandparents blamed me for my mother's condition. She drinks because of you. This is it because of you. It was always my fault. It's always my fault. Living in denial. It's my fault. My fault. I had my own house. I had my own kids. I was out doing my own business. I was doing my own thing. Had nothing to do with my mom, meaning as far as causing her to make any decision she did in her life. None. We are all responsible for our own decisions and our own choices in our own life, including our parents. So these children, we look at our parents as like, they're like superheroes, and they should be to a child. So anything that they do could be a major letdown, or a major pow, like incredible achievement. So as time went on, I became more successful. My mother became she kept staying sober. And I was very proud of her for that. And I would go to I started to go to AA meetings with her, and I'd sit there and I'd listen to her talk, and I was very, very proud of her. And we had long talks over coffee, and she'd come over to my house for dinner, and I would have holidays at my house. And I can remember my grandmother saying to me one year, and my mother was there, "Scotty, I never believed that I would be having Christmas dinner at your house." I was only 22 at the time. And yet, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I was, basically homeless and then working and then living above their house. But every time my mom saw me, she would take those wonderful moments and it would be like, I need money. I need this. I need that. My mother would only call me and show her face after that, after periods of time. Needed money. Needed something. I said, Ma, can you watch the kids? The grandkids, my kids want to see you. Da, 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 da. She was always great with the kids and taught them all about God and Jesus. She wasn't a religious freak, but she always had this way because she was a Sunday school teacher growing up in high school and then thereafter in her 20s on just to explain life to children. And she was very good at that with me when I was growing up. You never know what's going on with somebody from looking at them on the outside, because everybody on the outside looked at my mom and she was an incredible cook too. My mother was an incredible cook. So as time went on, our relationship got better. And as I said, I got to know my mom and we became friends, my real mom. And we had incredible times, some great, incredible times together on my boat or just those special moments that you have with a mom. Or, most of them were sitting at her house. I'd stop over after work late, working late. I'd be somewhere. I'd be like, Mom, you up? Can I stop over? And I'd go and sit and talk with her for hours. And it was never about the past. It was always about positive things and good things. And I wanted to help my mom to see that she could get over the past, that she didn't have to stay stuck as I saw her stay stuck. And it worked for a while. I remember her telling me one night, she said, Scott, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have learned a lot of the things I know. And if it wasn't for you being strong enough to stand up and tell me what I needed to know, I wouldn't have known. She said everybody else could care less. And she said the men that were involved in my life wanted me for my looks and for other things. And I said to her, I said, Mom, but that's who you created yourself to be. And as you see, my mother was looking for love in herself. My mother was looking for acceptance herself, like everybody is. And all my mom had to do was to accept herself for herself inside of her and look in the mirror, as we all have to do, and be at peace with herself. But she couldn't be at peace with herself because she could never learn how to forgive herself. True story. She could never learn to forgive herself. As much as I tried to teach her how to forgive herself, some things I believe she did. My mom was always in the garden. She's the one who taught me about plants and flowers, and she was always at peace doing that, working with flowers and in the garden and drawing and doing art. And she always kept telling me, she said, Scotty, she always wanted to write a book. My mother was a great writer. She always wanted to write a book, and she was saving all these things that she wanted to write a book about her life and everything that happened with my father's family and the things she saw. And she also wanted to write children's books. But she always wanted to get published. So I said to her, I said, okay, Mom. And I had just started to come out on different magazines for work that I did and things like that. And I said to her, I said, I know the publisher at one of the top magazines. I said, I'll talk to him on the next story they're going to do for me. And it was for a residence that I did in Quogue. It's a historical home in East Quogue on Long Island in the Hamptons. And I said, you write the story. I'll put you in touch with them and talk to them first. And then I did. And I asked him to do me a favor. And Dennis Sheehan, the publisher, did do me a favor and took her story and published the story. And she got to write a story about her son achieving something that most never did at 22 years old, 23 years old, whatever I was. And she got to fulfill one of her dreams, which was to be published. And it was a great story, and it's a story that's on one of my Facebook walls, magazine. And over the years, some people from recent things, not recent, but over some years ago, some things that I went through, some people actually tried to rip some of these that was one of them, one of the magazine articles apart, saying that I paid someone to write that article. They never even knew that the article was written by my mom, and that the publisher was going to use a different writer, and that the publisher approached me about the story. And publishers just don't publish people, or write stories about people because they have nothing to write about, or they haven't achieved something, or something to do it. And I'll never forget my mom when I brought her that magazine and showed it to her, fresh from the print, how proud she was, not just of herself, but of me. And I'll never forget it. And she talked about it till she thanked me. It was like one of those bucket list things. And that magazine, whenever, this is my son, and then I got to write the story. And my point about others trying to take that story away with other articles and lies was they were trying to strip me of my success, and at the same time, in doing that, they're trying to strip my mom basically of the article. People do some horrible things. People can be very, very nasty, very, very dark. Hate stems from jealousy, insecurities. So now time goes on, and I'm going through my own serious situation. I'm about 26, 27, with my wife, my ex-wife. Yeah. Been divorced since 1998. With my wife. My mother always told me, I'll never forget it. And my mother was right about that. My mother had one of those sixth sense you always have with your mom. Some people do. I had a very close one. My mom would pick up the phone, and I would pick up the phone at the same time, and we didn't even know it. And then, sure enough, we were there. Sometimes she'd pick it up at the same time. Strange stuff. But I know why. I mean, I believe in that. She always told me, and when I went to go get married when I was 19. She said, Scott, that's not your baby. I know it's not your baby. She's trying to take advantage of you and marry you. She was right. And I kept saying, Mom, I want to do the right thing in case it is my child. DNA tests were not very prominent then, or even, I don't even know if they were in existence until years later. But she was right. My mother was right about a lot of things. My mom was right about a lot of things with her senses and a mother's intuition. And my mom had a lot of courage, as all moms do, I believe. Especially single moms. And you try to live, a parent, a mother, tries to live their lives at the same time to raise their children. So they're and if they're struggling with the issues of divorce, or someone, they fell in love with somebody, or somebody turned out not to be who they are, It's a lot to grasp for people. And a lot of people get stuck. And I see it every day on Facebook. I see it everywhere. And I know I was stuck a while myself, and I've discussed it many times on different parts of my show. You'll never find me stuck anymore. So time goes on. I end up getting divorced. I end up selling off part of my business, dumping the other half. Dumped a multi-million-dollar company for other reasons, as I've discussed in other shows. My mother had become somewhat of a, because of her illness, she would be stuck at home a lot. She was home all the time. And she ended up with another man. She ended up getting remarried. That didn't work. And she ended up with someone else. That didn't work. Looking for love in all the wrong places. Gotta have that. And I believe it's seeking out, and I'm going to be doing a show on that because it's very deep. How people will go from one person to the next. And I find it because, especially with women, and I don't mean this is not to sound bad because it's true, I believe women's clocks go off inside of them, like, okay, I have to be married and I have to do this by this age and I have to be, I want to do this and be with somebody and blah, blah, blah. Now, don't get me wrong, there's lots of independent single women out there that don't do this, but there's many that do. It's okay to be alone. It's okay to, you must, and as I constantly try with my mother, and I learned something huge from a major part of this. You can't help someone if they don't want to help themselves, period. And that's a saying, everybody says it. I'm being very serious. You cannot help someone unless they want to help themselves. Unless they go and look in the mirror, as we all have to do, there's no way they're going to look at themselves and go, it's like them being an alcoholic, and they go, finally admitting, that's the huge step. I'm an alcoholic. That's you looking at reality. I'm an alcoholic, or I'm got this issue, or I have this issue, or that issue. You will stay stuck and go in circles and circles and circles. And everybody knows, I hope you know, the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. If you're doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. My mom used to always send me cards. Even when I was a few blocks away, my mom was known for sending me cards all the time. And that's how I know my mother, it was the little things that my mom did. She'd send me cards. It was one of them. Beautiful cards. Beautiful poems or about God, or incredible. And they would just show up in the mail. Sometimes I'd even find them on my car, my house, under the wiper. And they're from my mother. Or she'd leave me a message when she wasn't, when she finally got sober. And it was nice messages, not long, drawn out, crazy messages. I got to understand why my mother did a lot of things that she did in her life, and why we all do things we do in our lives, and the decisions that we make at the times that we make them, and what we believe decisions we are making are right for us at the time, like my mother believed in many of hers, may not. If they're not the right decisions. But you don't know until you fall. You don't know if that's the right decision until you find out the result. Every action has a reaction. And thus we all learn. And that is part of our purpose, is to learn. And my mom got sicker. Every time I would see my mom, she was sicker. And she would stay stuck in this house. And finally, she wouldn't even let me in the house. And that's when I knew something was really going bad. My grandparents would come and see her. She stopped coming to dinner at my grandparents' My grandmother then stopped having Christmas and Easter dinners. It was like everything changed. And my mom just stayed in her house, so she'd only run to the pharmacy, or she'd call me up, can you get my pills from here, or go from there. And I would. And I'd go see her, but she'd open the door and she wouldn't let me in. And my mother was just getting sicker, and she didn't want to tell anybody how sick she was becoming, and she was very sick. And she suffered. She suffered. And now, I'm going to fast forward here. 1999, I discussed it on another show, Seeing Heaven and Hell. I had my near-fatal auto accident. There's a knock on my mother's door. It's the state police. They were called from Pennsylvania that I was in a near-fatal auto accident to notify. It was the card, my contact information was in my wallet. They contacted my mother in person, not by phone. State police showed up at her door to tell her that her son was in a near-fatal auto, is in an auto, and is dying, would be dead within 30 minutes roughly, and that's what they were told. And I told this and part of this, and so my mother gets this information, and my mom, it was very, I know it was shattering for my mom, and then she didn't find out till 48 hours later that I'd survived it after dying and tanking and being brought back to life. Do you know, my mom never came to see me when I got out of the hospital, or even while I was in the hospital. I was in the coma for a while. She never came to see me. And it wasn't that she didn't want to come. It was because she was so sick. And I was in Pennsylvania in a hospital, and my mother was on Long Island, and my grandparents were too old to drive that far. I remember having a conversation with my mom after I got out of the hospital and the coma and the whole bit and da-da-da. And she's telling me the story about the state police and this, and she goes, you don't understand, you nearly killed me, and blah, blah, blah. This is what it was about. This is the conversation I have after I'm sitting there, trach, stitches, everything, cage in my head, brain swollen. I'm being real here. My mother's talking about her. How this accident, that here I am in a snowstorm, no alcohol, it's the morning, never, nothing. It was just the morning. It was the morning drive that I told the story. I'm not going to go into it now. My mother's conversation with me was about how it affected her, not, okay, Scott, you know, I'm glad you're alive. Are you gonna? What's going to be okay? Da, da, da. I didn't even know who I was for I don't know how long after that. I mean, here I have this, my mom talking to me about this stuff, and I'm like, 6 months later, I remember sitting back and thinking about this whole thing and how you have your parents and you love them dearly. And if you have wonderful parents, and there's so many wonderful parents out there that raise their children great and have been there for them, and God bless you, I've always envied those families. I've always envied those parents with their children who've done that for their children and have those great relationships today. God bless you. And there's tons of single moms that have done it and single dads that have done it too, as well as parents that have stayed together and what doesn't matter. And then you have lots of people that stay together for the wrong reasons. They claim it's for their children. That's a whole different matter. I envy those. I truly, I don't envy anything anymore, but I have a ton of respect for those parents and for those, if you're one of those children, male or female, and it's Mother's Day, and your mom was one of those good moms that kept it together and has been real and there for you, be thankful to God, because you have something special that many do not have or have had, and maybe only had it in bits and pieces. Be very, very grateful for your mom. You only have one. And even with my mom, I only had one. So now I'm listening to all this, and as I said, I'm still out of it. And I'm like, you know what? I can't talk about this. And I basically did. I started to isolate my mom then after this accident. I had to get better myself. I had to figure out what the hell happened to me, what I saw when I died. I was trying to put that all together. I was trying to take care of her. My daughter was just born 2 months before this auto accident. And several other matters popped up at that moment in time because of some decisions I made to claim bankruptcy on a company in Pennsylvania. And here, I just grew distant from my mom. And I after that auto accident, I said I was not myself for 12 months to 2 years. I was out of it. And when I say out of it, and finally I learned later it was because of the swelling in my brain, my head. And I've put pictures of the CAT scans and everything that I've recently done. You see my skull. It was crushed. The whole thing was crushed. And here's my mom. That's all she could tell me is about herself and how I nearly killed her because I was in this auto accident that I didn't even cause. It wasn't even my fault. It took me years to deal with that. And I knew, I mean, I learned, as I said, and that's why I'm here to talk to you, because I've learned how to deal with these things, and I want to help you be able to deal with similar things. So now, as I start to get better, and this is only a few months after the accident, my mom starts to date a cop, a New York City cop, ex-New York City cop. I meet this guy by chance, and I happened to be out on Long Island after my auto accident, and I was seeing a knee doctor that had to operate on my knee. And I stopped by to see my mother, and this guy was there. His name's Walter. And I see this guy, and he's drinking beer in my mother's house. Now, my mother's going on 8 years sober at this time. And I said to this man, I said, come here. A cop or no cop, I don't care. I said, come here. I took him outside, and I said, do you understand that my mother's a severe alcoholic, and she's been sober for 8 years, and you know what it took for her to get her life to this moment? And you see how sick she is, right? I said, I'm going to explain to you. The doctors told her because of her heart, if she drinks again, she's going to end up dead. That's what I told this man. Yeah, I understand. I said, no, I'm going to tell you now. You do understand what I'm telling you. I said, I don't care if you're a cop. I said, this is serious business here. I said, that's my mother you're talking about. Don't drink around her. I said, get the booze out of the house right now. And I said, you're not going to drink in my mother's house ever again. And I said, I will know. And I was dead serious. I saw him later on at my mother's funeral, not even a few months later. I threw him out of there. And it's not his fault. It's my mother's fault. But you don't entice or tease a drug addict by putting drugs in front of them, or an alcoholic by putting alcohol in front of them, until they're at that point that they can accept that. And my mother, even though she's 8 years sober, not at this point in her life. As I told you, she's very sick, and she's going through a lot. And no matter what, and that's my point of this show, is no matter what, you have only one mom. And no matter what they do, they'll always be your mother. And you must forgive anyone who harms you, or if you've had that relationship with your mother, or your mother did something to you that has hurt you. You must forgive within yourself, and thus forgive them. Never forget it, but you must forgive them to move on for your own peace. You can never be at peace if you have harbored hate and anger and hold grudges. So now, as I discussed in 2 shows ago, I go through some serious issues with the Italian mob who I'm with and things like that. And I tell my mother, I go see my mother, and I said, Mom, I'm not going to be around for a little while. I got to go. And I explained to her why, in brief. So I said, I'll stay in touch with you by phone, even though I'm not supposed to, And I said, I'll make sure somebody comes and checks on you. So I do this. I do what I have to do. And I'm in New Jersey now. And I didn't get into that in the other part of the show, but I was in New Jersey under an assumed name. And as I said in my other show, I refused to testify. But for 5 months, the FBI had me under an assumed name at a long-term hotel with my ex-wife, my ex-fiance, who was the woman I was involved with right after I got a divorce and who I have a daughter with, my daughter Megan. And I said, as I said, I never testified. I never gave the feds what they wanted because I couldn't do it and I wouldn't do it. But during this time, here I am recouping for this auto accident. Then I just had to have knee surgery because I crushed my knee in the auto accident because I had all this work done. They wanted that to heal before my knee. I'm trying to stay in touch with my mom as best I could. And I didn't want anything to happen to my mom or have anybody reach out because the people I was around knew my mother. One of them in particular, as I discussed in my show, he knew my mother well. And he took care of my mom at times when I asked of it. So I just didn't want them reaching out to her to try to find me, when in fact I was doing nothing against them, but they get paranoid like that. So I stay in touch with her, and I'm going through my own hell. I mean, serious hell at this time. And I lost my ex-fiance at the time. I lost seeing my daughter because of all of this mess. And it's my own fault. I don't blame anybody. My own decisions. You have to own up to your own decisions in life. And as I said, you got to fall. In other words, you got to die to live. And that's what that auto accident is about to me. And it was a true sign. True. And I'm telling you this. You have to die to live. In other words, you have to fall and get up and start again and learn. So you have to fall and learn. You have to die to live. Understand? And have to understand that. You never learn lessons without falling. In other words, you have to, there's a right and a wrong. And if you don't learn you don't learn the wrong unless you fall. It's a mistake. You make a mistake, you learn from it. You go on and on and on and on and on. And everybody makes mistakes, and there's nobody perfect. And anybody looking at this, I don't care what you have to say, because there's a lot of haters out there. In general, people are just, anyway, they'll take it. You could tell a hater, they could see you walk on water and they'll just say you can't swim. So I get this long call. It's on my message from my mom. And when I haven't gotten a long message from my mother like this. Was almost 45 minutes long. You guys remember the old answering machines we had? They could go on and on and on as long as the thing was there, or the answering services that we had. I had answering that type of service. This message was like 45 minutes long, and it was my mother, and she was drunk after 8 years of being sober. And I knew it was coming. I could sense it when I talked to that, I'm going to say, that asshole on my mother's front porch. And she's going on and on and on. And that night, I was late when I got the message and I got back in. I wanted to call my mom. I was like, okay, I'll call my mom in the morning. Well, the following day, my phone rings in the morning. Well, it was about 11:30 in the afternoon. It's my uncle, the one I don't get along with, my mother's brother. A severe alcohol, I mean, beyond severe alcoholic, who lost everything in his life because of alcoholism. He had a job at the Daily News as a top person at the Daily News in New York. Top executive, gone because of alcohol. Lost everything in his life because of alcohol. He's on the phone. Now, he calls me, not my grandparents. And why he's calling me is because my grandparents are a wreck. And now he's upstate New York. He calls me and tells me, Scott, your mother's dead. I said, what do you mean? And he tells me that my grandparents kept calling her, and they always called my mom to check on her. And their ritual was like on Saturday mornings, they would call my mom, and sometimes they'd take a ride out there, or they'd get one of their friends to give them a ride out there to see my mom. Well, she didn't answer her phone. She didn't answer her phone. So my grandfather, still being the cop he is, however 80 years old he was, he goes and he gets in his car with my grandmother, and he actually drives. He still has license, but he shouldn't have been driving. And he drove all the way out to my mom's, which was a good hour away on Long Island, Long Island Expressway, maybe 45 minutes. Goes there, no answer at the door, but my mother's car is there. He calls the local police, which in that precinct out there actually has to be another family member who's actually from a relative on my mother's side, from my mom, is a detective. They go in and they break in the doors. They break the door down. They go inside. And my own grandfather, told my grandmother to stay outside. Found his daughter dead on the floor in the bathroom. She was about to leave. She had just, looks like it did, she had just done her makeup and had a heart attack right there. And she had been heavily drinking with Walter the night before. And you could say to yourself, if Walter kept the booze out, she could still be alive and done it. No. One thing I've learned in life is that everything happens for a reason. And when it's your time to die, you will die. And it's okay to die. Trust me. I was dead. And if you haven't seen my show, watch it, because it's from my soul, what I saw and what I see and what I believe. And it's not because of what I saw. Never feared death. My mother would have died at that time and that place. But you know what it's the result of? The choices that we all make. It's the choices that determine our destiny and our time. Understand what I'm saying to you. It's a little deep, but it's true. It's true, 100% true. So now my uncle stays upstate. My grandparents are a mess. My grandfather, I call my grandfather. First thing out of my mouth is, I'll handle everything. And I was the executive of my mother's estate. The only child. And now I'm with the situation with the feds. Not them against me. I'm with them. They're keeping me in. I've deemed it wrong name for a long time. I've referred to it as witness protection, when there's a difference. The feds will deliver you to the U.S. Marshals for witness protection. When in fact I was with them, I was under their care as a cooperating witness, and not because I was arrested for any federal crime, but because they told me my auto accident wasn't an accident, and that the person I was around was trying to harm me, which turned out to be a load of crap. And hence they were trying to use me to testify to get this man, which is in the other show. So you see how everything ties into one to the other in life. Everything happens for a reason, and the decisions we make alter the path that we take, and it alters those paths around the people we are around, and so on and so on and so on. That's how it works. It's really very simple. Excuse me, I apologize. So I go into my super I'll handle it mode. I can take it all. That's me. I'll handle it. Went in, saw my family. My family owns a funeral home. My father's family owns a funeral home for generations in Westbury. I went in. Had to see the man that is my real father, who was running the funeral home at that time. He's deceased now. To bury my mother. And look, I'll never forget that day I walked in there. I didn't even want to see that man. But you have to do what you have to do. And I had forgiven that man for many things. And we won't go into that tonight. Many horrible things. And I went in there and told him, because at this time now he was afraid of me. He could not harm me anymore. It was the other way around. And I said, you're going to take care of this, and this is what I want, and this is what I need. And he did. And I picked up my mother's cherry casket, and I had seagulls engraved in the top, in the wood. My mother always loved the beach. And I had to bury my mother. Do you know, it's 1999. I have never gone back to that gravesite. But I'm going. Because I can go now. And I used to always give my mother a dozen roses. Sporadically, here and there. Surprise her. And I can't get there for Mother's Day, but I'll be there a week later. Everyone has their struggles in life. And my mother had her own. And I learned from those struggles, even though I suffered as a child, and even into my adulthood from those issues. But I learned so much from them. And as I've told all of you here, you can take any type of bad situation and turn it into a good one and learn something from it, and you will learn how to be at peace. If you can conquer turning bad into good, you will be at peace. It is the true meaning of peace. And once you understand that everything here happens for a reason, and that you are in control of your life, and thus what you think and what you believe, what you do, affects everything in front of you and every step that happens and those around you, even the smallest words. I regret not calling my mom that night, and I use the word regret, and I'm not wrong words, because it's not a regret. I don't regret anything, because it wouldn't have changed the outcome. But I would have liked to talk to my mom one more time. But it still wouldn't have changed anything. It would have changed me, made me feel better. But it wouldn't have changed anything, and that's what you have to realize about things. Don't regret not talking to someone or seeing them before they pass away, or wanting to embrace it because you wanted to do it because it would make you feel better. It wouldn't have changed the situation, and it wouldn't have prevented the death, because I can assure you, and from what I've seen, that's when it's supposed to be. That's when it's supposed to be. There's nothing you can to stop it. The path is over. The lesson. Therefore, get out of life what you're supposed to. Learn your purpose. Love your mother. But don't allow anyone, including if you have a situation with your mother, where you have an estranged relationship, where you don't get along with your mother, don't let that eat you alive. You can never, ever please everybody, nor should you. You need to learn to please yourself. You need to learn to love yourself and learn from the lessons that your mother has taught you, the good and the bad. And learn to be at peace from it. Don't harbor any anger or long-term hard feelings. Never. Don't do it. Just don't do it. And for those of you with moms that you didn't have so many any real issues with or problems except for the normal, embrace your mother. Love her. You only have one. You only have one mom. And it's those little things that moms do that you will remember forever and that are instilled in us to our true morals and values and who we are and what we believe. It's those deep-rooted things that come from our moms, no matter what your relationship is along the way. And if you happen to be somebody who doesn't know their mom, their real mother, and I know there's people out there like that, and you have an adopted mom, mother, embrace them, because their love for you is just the same. And no regrets. Have no regrets. Ever. Forgive things and move forward. Learn to love yourself, and you'll watch your whole world change. And learn and understand that everything you think and you believe is who you are and what will happen in your life. So if you're negative, you're going to get negative. If you're positive, you will get positive. If you want to be a good mother, love your children. Love them. Not bury them, love them. And there's a big difference. Don't bury them. Be a role model for them. Live your life as well if you're a single mom, but also embrace your child's life. I miss you, Mom. Good night and God bless.